Hello, everyone. I'll give everyone a moment to connect to sound here. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1277th New Social Environment. I'm Joshua, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Cassi Namoda and Gaby Collins-Fernandez. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Cassi Namoda is a painter, performance artist, and storyteller whose work explores the complexities of everyday life in post-colonial Africa. Known for her vibrant figurative paintings, she weaves together personal memories, folklore, and cultural history to reflect on themes of identity, community, and spirituality. She has exhibited internationally, and her work is included in major institutional collections. Our host today is Gaby Collins-Fernandez, who's an artist living and working in New York City. Her work has been shown in the US and internationally. She's a founder and publisher of the annual magazine Precog and a co-director of the artist-run art and music initiative Bomb Pop-Up. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Gaby.
Hi everybody. It's amazing to be here with all of y'all. And really great to get to talk with Cassie about her show currently up at 303 Gallery. Cassie, I feel the work the show which is called Night Always Returns. I think one of the real strengths of your work and the joys of the exhibition is that you're able to invoke and pack a lot of different kinds of references and signification inside of a both really pleasurable and accessible, but also kind of reduced painting language. Um, and so I wanted to start out the conversation to ask you a little bit about this idea of night always returning and maybe some of the thematic ideas that you were considering as you put together this show, and what about the night was so persuasive for you as an idea.
Hi, Gabby. It's really nice to be in conversation with a fellow artist. And Joshua, that was a wonderful entry to Gabby. I just learned quite a bit. So yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, so thanks everyone for being here. Gabby, to answer your question, I started ruminating about this concept of night always returning and what the visual language could feel like. And I wanted to create something that was cinematic with a kind of circular cadence. And so the work ended up splitting up into four nocturnes with kind of reoccurring figures and layered narratives and palettes that were evocative of time and space. And I wanted to have sort of perceptions or kind of approach perceptions of what night, that sort of passage of time of from dusk to night. So this sort of twilight moment. So imagining, human and like boundaries between human and nature and local mythologies, in particularly in global south. And I grew up in East Africa, and a lot of my narratives or kind of storytelling is belongs to Mozambique. So I kind of like to approach narrative in that sense. So I split the work up in four nocturnes. So it starts with these um, the passage of the boat, which is night always returns, and it's a man on a dugout canoe, sort of coming back from a day of work in a point of entry into the Indian Ocean, which is called the River of Good Signs, Rio de Bocinage. And I was thinking a lot about Milton Avery's paintings when I was approaching some of the landscape, and thinking also about, well, I guess I always use the canon of art to imagine painting. And so I also thought about Monet's water lilies and how he used a mix of plein air and imagination. So that was sort of like one of the approaches that I took. And then in terms of the thematics, I had first opened up this book that was inspired by a place called Gorengosa, which is in the north of Mozambique, which is a um, wildlife sanctuary. And one of the passages in the text was night always returns. So it's sort of this um, looking at the sort of animality and vulnerability of what happens at dusk. And then I started thinking about like the human psyche at when things start to progress into night, and that it could also feel sort of wild and existential.
Yeah, I was thinking, there's so much to talk about even in the introduction that you just gave. And I think that will maybe hopefully expand.
Dissect. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry?
I said, yeah, we could dissect and expand and
But I was thinking too, just in terms of the painting, thinking about Milton Avery and these like the cool pinks and blues, and thinking about landscape in that way makes a lot of sense. I was also thinking about Bob Thompson, looking at your work, just in terms of the color
yeah.
structure and also the way that he kind of turns allegorical spiritual painting into these sort of organic, flat, abstract spaces. Um, Obviously, there are a lot of different references in your work. I was also thinking about this idea of night as having the psychological potential of like transformation that happens despite someone, right? It's kind of a mysterious moment of rest, of irrationality, right? For lack of a
Mm-hmm.
better word. And I was thinking specifically of the painting of one of the Marias in the bathtub in opposition to the painting of the octopus, which both seem to kind of display the idea of the body as vulnerable or a body as vulnerable, and also this kind of relationship between a creature which is dying or at risk of dying, being handled, having been handled by a human, and then a human figure in this case, somebody who occupies a kind of both art historically nameable position of like female figure in reclining bathtub situation, and then in the other case of another femme appearing figure kind of like working with this shell and this octopus. And so I know there's a lot in this observation too.
Right.
It's just a lot to
Yeah.
unpack in your work, which is again amazing because I'm like the paintings
Yeah.
like are deceptively simple and then they kind of open outward into this kind of stream of references, both art historically and mythologically. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like this kind of psychology in the work,
Mm.
the psychology of the color. I think,
Mm-hmm.
Avery is somebody who uses that specifically, right? Because like the acidity of the cool tones really helps us understand that the landscape is like not quite right, as though like we're thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
light as it hits the back of our retina and how
Mm-hmm.
that prepares us to think that something different might be happening in this space or in this kind of condition.
Yeah, the bathtub scene, with the antelope expiring.
Mm,
Um, I was thinking of sort of like well, first I was spent the I spend a lot of my summers in the south of France just because I live a 3 hour drive, and Bonnard was one of the painters that I had seen recently. I think at Foundation Met. It was a beautiful show, and there's this amazing bathtub painting of a woman stretched out in the bathtub. But what was so wonderful was the perspective of the painting, and then the palette of the bathtub, which was full of soft pinks. And so I kind of wanted to recreate that painting, but then again, sort of add mythology, and then um, personalize it, and the so the figure is this sort of stretched out, almost animal like uh, figure as well, or anthropomorphic kind of figure as well, like. And then I had this expiring, many who have dogs or cats, they usually like to lay by the tub when you're in the bath. So here's this Maria where she's returned from a day of work, or her work at night, which was essentially all the feminine figures are all the same reiteration of this Maria character. So the moon path paintings actually lead up to this very moment. So the exhibition essentially closes with, or the story closes with this particular painting. So the three Marias is this reoccurring figures that are sort of these lifeblood blood characters. I mean, if I think about sort of history of painting and what the Maria personifies, that's uh, that this is why this is essentially a lifeblood character in my work. It's sort of this homage to um, painting in the church, religious iconography, um, and so it's the three Marias, and then it, but then they connect to this sort of um, they had this interior life. So this is the exterior life moment. So then the interior life is the seashell collector working silently um, to collect shells using the light of the moon, so the moon path light. And then you have this octopus sort of silently looking to her sort of collection, or her work. And then in the nostalgic melancholy of Diolinda takes on a sort of more sour approach, where she's feeding seagulls a sort of abstract meat, abstract flesh. And you get this sense of isolation and sort of the bitterness of um, lack of community. So she's she's befriended uh, the creatures. But in terms of color, I look often to I had done all the Albers residencies, so I've studied Joseph and Annie Albers' color sensibility, and when I visit Milton Avery's work, I see a lot of the same sort of approach, where a blue can be a warm blue. So you mentioned the term acidity. So yeah, you get this sense that it's not a cold night. It's a tropical night. So I wanted to find ways where a pink could be a cold pink, or a blood could be a red blood. A blood red could feel cold. Um, so I like these kind of transformations of the perception of color. I think that's a way to really evoke narrative and sensibility around story.
It's interesting, I think, in talking about some of the symbolism of your work. I don't know um, if this is like a vernacular reference, but like in my mother's family is Cuban, and in Spanish, you might refer to a group of women, like especially a group of three women, as las tres Marias, like the three Marias.
Yes,
Casually,
exactly.
right? It's like, oh, like the three Marias were out to lunch, or like the three
Yes.
Marias went shopping, or something like this. And so, like, yes, of course, like the loadedness of the name Mary and its connection with the history of iconography is really important, but there's also like, I think there's also a very strong vernacular tradition in the history, certainly the history of Catholic painting. Um, and also kind of in the history of how like story, especially local storytelling, would have mixed uh like stories from the Bible or myths from the Bible,
Exactly.
local stories, to create both these points of connection and syncretism, but also to kind of, like collapse time, space, and scale. And
Totally.
yeah, I was like this idea of the vernacular, like like thinking about like how we think about Giotto or somebody like this, right? Where you're just like the
Hmm.
way to bring the ideology home is to place the story inside of recognizable terminology, like the recognizable vernacular of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, how I came up with the Three Marias is that I was years ago was reading a book on Luso African mythology, and so much of the mythology and the folklore have Catholic roots. So there is a story about the Three Marias and their escapades throughout town, and then it proceeds to, the Three Marias are also these kind of saint angelic figures, and they wanted to approach to heaven's gate. And I forget the story, but essentially that's how I came up with it. But also, like in Mozambique, all my relatives have Maria as a second name. So there is this personal history that interweaves in it. And then I also often think about like magical realism as the sort of floor plan for the storytelling, which is the main stylized sort of way of telling story in Luso Africa.
I mean, I think there's also something really, in thinking about something interesting in thinking about your relationship to post-impressionist painters, which is that like with people like Van Gogh and Bonnard, Van Gogh differently than Bonnard, but like you get the sense that like the psychological bricks of the painting begin with a mark, right? And that the mark is not the thing which is observational. The mark is the thing which demonstrates the presence of a certain kind of like authorial sensibility or psychological sensibility, where then color becomes the element of those paintings that connects them both to observation and the departure from observation. And I was thinking about how much of these paintings are built on cross-hatching, as though you like, in some ways, it's like the weave, right? It becomes this kind of like woven element in the work. But it's also interesting because like the way that you paint figures or animals in the work tends to be flatter. And the way that you elaborate the landscape in this body of work comes from this kind of like um, hatch mark kind of brushwork,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was an interesting kind of art historical callback,
Mm-hmm.
which also like rounds out the idea of atmosphere, while it
Mm-hmm.
also allows us to see the figures as these kinds of like allegorical stand-ins in a certain way. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about touch or things that you're thinking about on that level.
Yeah, well, so often I'm looking, either I start painting from, like you said, there's a certain mark, so either I start from a, the figure and then I build out the landscape, or I start with landscape, then I plant in the figure. So there's a few things that I'm approaching in terms of the surface, but I tend to like to build out the atmosphere because that just makes me think of something that I have almost maybe, if I were to imagine, like no control of in a way. Like I try to think about like what if I was just working from um, observation? What would that look like? If what does the water look like? Or if there's, dappled light. So in some ways the figures are more just play on shapes. And I like to have these different sort of stylized moments in painting because I'm essentially just referencing.
Mhm. Yeah, and so when you look at these, are the landscapes are invented or they come from memory?
No, they're invented. Like I was just thinking like, oh well, how could this be like Milton Avery? So I just like kind of sketch out, you know. So yeah, that was the really fun thing about making this body of work. It's just completely just like it's the love of painting.
Mm.
It's just like the love of the history of art and just like thinking how those painters that have come before me, how could I channel them through painting and evoke something that is familiar and that if we love painting, we love art history, they come through. I mean, you mentioned Giotto. It's like that blood red is that's Giotto,
Yeah.
you know.
Also, I mean, I'm thinking also too that like this description of like the way that you're talking about painting and referentiality on the one hand is like something that feels like it's really a part of contemporary art discourse, you know what I mean? Like especially
Yeah,
painting, like where it's hard to be a painter and not be obsessed with the history of painting. Like it there I'm sure there are people who are not, but it puts them in a sort of difficult position, you know, because
sure, sure. I completely agree.
painters are like painting nerds, unfortunately, I guess. But so there's
For
that
better or for worse.
for better or for worse. But I think there's also something the way that you're talking about like bringing in these people, like bringing in Milton Avery, bringing in Giotto. I'm sure, you know, like I know that there are other references, Van Gogh, Bonnard, you know,
Gauguin.
Gauguin, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was thinking also that the color structure was very Matisse and Morocco, of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these paintings. Um, that like
I think I'm still like stuck in like a Fauvist thing.
hmm. I mean, it's also interesting because that was very much about like this, the idea of interpretation as adding to observation, right? In this
Mm,
particular way, that it wasn't just like straight out expressionism, but that there was a kind of like intuitive, intuitive, quick, fast relationality or something between observation and painting. But I think also there's something about like you talk about it almost like it's like a ritual, you know what I mean? Like there's a kind of ritualistic element of like summoning Milton Avery to make this invented.
well, it's a haunting.
Totally. And I was thinking about that in relationship to the other kinds of ritual apparent in your work, right? Like the idea almost that like night always returns is also a ghost story, right? It's like we're haunted
Totally.
the shift of day into night or like the having to go to work and returning from work or you know the body as having integrity and then meat as being something that you feed to seagulls, right? The different states of flesh. And I was thinking about this especially in relationship to the video in the back room, which on the one hand is like both the most and least symbolic
Mm-hmm.
element of your work. Also interesting, you know, speaking of like the kind of stacking of references in here, you know, like the idea of including prayer stools, um, the video itself, which is recorded in Mozambique, is that correct?
Yeah, and then also the vernacular, the prayer stools. You mentioned vernacular a few times throughout the show, but that was like the in a way, like you said, the most literal symbolic part was is that room in a way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the video was recorded in Mozambique. It was just like moment. I mean, I just dug through my phone and was just like, okay, I wanted to, I wanted to like have a real moving image moment and and also a personal history moment. So I just felt like this was a nice extension. I had studied cinematography and then also literary work being such an important part of my practice. The essentially the love of writing, the love of poetry and prose. So there's this a poem from Leopold Senghor, who started the Negritude movement. He was a Senegalese president and an author and a poet and a really incredible mind. So I created this prayer room, which had incense burning throughout the day. So there was this sort of monastic essence when you enter the space, which also bled out into the exhibition. And in the video, I'm sort of exchanging audio between prayer and breath work, the sort of like sound of labor, hard labor, and air, humid air. Like we all know what humid air sounds like when you open your car window and you're just kind of driving through wherever, whether it's, you know, Berkshire countryside or Hamptons in summer or, you know, global south. So I wanted to have that sensorial moment, and then the sort of exchange of imagery, which was deeply personal.
I think we can play the video if you feel like that's
Yeah,
something like Cassie.
yeah.
Cool.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى ال سيدنا محمد على سيدنا محمد وعلى ال سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم انت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك يا ذا الجلال والاكرام. اللهم ربنا اتنا في الدنيا حسنه وفي الاخره حسنه وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب القبر.
Yeah, so I wanted to add like something that felt like ancestral interior. So sort of a homage to the place and origin of painting, just like or of the exhibition rather. So there was almost like two origin stories, right? Where it was like it was deeply connected to this world of pastiche and history of painting, where there are all these quotes and citations from different moments in those that have came before me, and then it progresses to a very you know, African diasporic moment, which, you know, shifts the energy of the exhibition. And I there's this just to divert a little bit, I had just thought about it. Robert Motherwell quote on like every great painter has the history of painting, you know, and it essentially is just saying that you can't really approach painting without that history, or it's just very challenging because, you know, good painting needs history, it needs a long lifeline.
Mhm. Well, something that I was thinking about, in this conversation too, is the incense from Santa Maria Novella in Florence?
Indeed.
So, I think one of the things that let's see if I can make this cogent. Talking about like painting as having this like long lifeline, like I feel like we know now in this contemporary moment in 2025, although like, you know, in modernism, we kind of lost the plot a little bit about like what the function of history might be. But that
Mm,
like we actually need images to have a long lifeline. Like we need art objects to not only be about the present, to be about the present and also the past. Because there are so many complications that have happened in the past that we need to continue to refuse their flattening. Like thinking about
right.
the history of like Christianity as a colonizing force, which also created like a governmental colonizing force, right? In East Africa,
Totally.
many, many places in the world, but then being like, that's, like when we talk about like post-coloniality, it's not something that like emerged at the moment of a nation's like independence movement, right? You're dealing with like hundreds of years of like hundreds of years of colonial influence and then different legacies of ancestral influence before then. Like if you're not dealing with aesthetic practices that have long lifelines, like what chance do we have to know where we are? Like,
I mean, if even if when you look at like Picasso or Matisse or, you know, Giacometti or whatever, they were looking at African sculpture, so that had come before them as well. Most of those references. So um, we call that primitive, but that for them was like completely contemporary, modern, useful reference, you know. So uh, I like this idea of um, gaining agency over particular, you know, depictions, right? So if I'm having a sort of like when I made Tropical Depression for Xavier Hopkins, like I was thinking about faraway places and how painters like Emil Nold or Gauguin or many other like Fauvist painters of that time were traveling to these quote unquote exotic destinations, but like they're not exotic for me, you know. So this idea of like not it's not a taking back, but a sort of it's an agency, right? And then also being a woman painter
yeah.
and telling these stories is it helps keep those paintings alive in a way, the paintings that come before me. So I think we need just like we just always need new perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the effects, like you talked about this before, and I hope everyone gets a chance to go see the show. But the effect of the sounds of the video and the smell of the incense as you walk into the show lets you know that something else is going to happen when you go into the back. But then once you go and come back, it reorients the experience of the show in the sense that what begins as, or at least for me, my experience walking into the show was seeing a group of paintings whose aesthetic language I was interested in learning more about, right? Kind of piecing these things together almost the way that we did in this conversation. And then sort of going into the back, seeing the video, I was like, okay, like I'm now I'm in a different place. And the place has to do with like it's very located. Like all of a sudden these paintings that I was thinking about in a more historical sense feel like they are more firmly rooted and located in a specific African experience in a specific location that I'm now learning more about as I build
Mm.
out the mythologies and as I connect it to the kind of associative logic of the video.
But I like how you say that because like that was sort of my approach, was that I just wanted you to enter. I wanted people to enter with this sort of curiosity, and I wanted the show to feel like that there is this ambiguous nature about it, right? And that there is something to reveal and unveil, and this sort of ambiguity of like passage of time and place and space, and then you enter this realm because essentially that's a portal, right? um, and then it kind of spits you out, and then you feel like you've just learned something that is metaphysical, right? Then you're just there and you've understood it, and you're like, ah, okay, so it reaches there, but it also spans across in a very rooted way.
Yeah, I think it also it then kind of I think there's like the and I know we're coming back, I'm bringing up psychology again.
Mm.
Talked about it's like your shows. I think there's like a lot in your work, previous exhibitions and also in this work that's like kind of moody, you know, like
Yeah,
on like
there's duality, polarity is what I'm trying to
yeah,
evoke.
it's like there's action and then there's also this kind of like reflection which is um introspective, you know, depression. I don't speak
Tension.
tension. I don't speak Portuguese, but I know
Mm.
saudade
Mm. Saudade, yeah,
is a
it's
certain
like a kind of unplaced melancholy, or this sort of ambiguous melancholy. Yeah.
right. And so this idea of like this tension, cycles, return,
And
localization.
then the cadence of time. So it's sort of like also exploring time in a very abstract way, and that time is this actually circular phenomenon, because that's how um, I've learned when I've read John Mbiti's writings, how so many rural societies in Eastern Africa, I don't know about the rest of the continent, but they see time as this abstract thing, and that past and present exist, but the future is an unknown and is not abstract. So I really look at the sort of stillness of the moment. So these paintings are really rooted in a very present way. Um, so that's this sort of cadence. I'm sort of really interested in this African notion of time.
Mm. And then I think there's this other kind of like looming threat of like existential crisis and also
Totally.
rest, right? Like there's the tension between like photosynthesis is re at rest and like the night as rest time, and then also this space where things might just totally fall apart.
Exactly. which which is I was like thinking about like what it is to be an animal in the great savannah, in this very wild place, because I've done safaris, I've gone out and at dusk, and I've seen how things quickly change once night approaches. And again, like there's this you mentioned hatching, but there is this interweaving that I'm constantly exploring when painting. And so I was like, well, what happens at night, right? There's vulnerability, um, there's there's existential crises, there's rest, there's repose, there's meditative qualities, there's joy. So all of this is expanded throughout the exhibition, which I think is all um, very relatable because it's all lived human experience.
Mm.
Would I know we wanted to maybe Gabby, if you have any other questions, I know we wanted to share a prose, or I had something that I. picked out for.
This happens at the end after the Q&A, but if you
Oh, cool.
wanted to
No,
be
no, that's perfect.
okay, like it's the closer, but if you want it to happen earlier, we can reorganize.
Well, I think it kind of ties in with the exhibition, so maybe that's a nice way to enter the Q&A if you, I know we're arriving at Q&A moment.
Yeah, I think, I have one more question. It's sort of
Of
like
course.
bigger, it's sort of like the flip
Hmm.
side of the personal psychology,
Yes.
kind of the personal anxiety and transformation.
Hmm.
And again, some of the references that came to mind for me were some like like St. John of the Cross or something like this, like Dark Night of the Soul.
Hmm.
And then on the one hand, and then like Pedro Almodovar, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown on the other side of it.
Genius. Love it. Yes.
But I
Yes.
was thinking about like the function of spirituality, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about like another tension in your work, which is um, the question of the spirit and the movement of the spirit on the one hand, and then on the other hand, this sort of like legacy of Christian or Catholic
Hmm.
structure and ritual in your work as
Hmm.
well.
So there's one paint, there's the show has 9 paintings because we wanted to create something really tight, but there is one painting that alludes to a few moments you have described throughout the questions where you mentioned Giotto. There's a painting of um, sort of this ambiguous two legs sort of sitting um, down the canvas where, and then there's a man to the right nailing the feet, and that same blood red and the rusted color background. So it's essentially connected to the boys bathing in the ancestral blood. And then there's this other painting of a really lung like or organ like hibiscus opening up, which also we didn't hang in the show, but I think Lisa's showing it at Basel, Paris. But those are, but that was a very direct religious painting that kind of was a very obvious hit on the three paintings in its totality, right? This sort of idea that well, I consider a lot when I'm working, I consider African spirituality and a lot of Christian theology I'm looking at because I've been very fascinated by the merge of two, this merge of like um, you know, African folklore, African spirituality, but then the theology of, you know, um, Western religion. And so I think these two subjects and these two beliefs in an African landscape creates very rich storytelling. So I always approach painting with those two. And in Mozambique, it's there's not like it's a very animist society, and also this the foreground of most people is this African socialism. So actually, religion is secondary. Um, so you could be like of Islamic background with a name like Maria. So people have asked me like, well, so this feels like Muslim, but then you have, Catholic moments in your work, or why is this Maria having a Islamic wedding? So I like this multicultural abstract
Mhm.
that there's no linearity, like Africa doesn't exist with things in a linear sense, and everything is just sort of merged and circular, and um, that's the intrigue of society, and for me that's the intrigue of telling story and in these paintings, because it's like whatever we've been told or what we've been perceived as like a blue is a cold blue, then here it is in this very warm, we know that's warm water
Mm.
without being told that that's warm water.
Amazing. Um, Thank you so much, Cassie. I feel like maybe that is the right moment to transition to the poem to round out the conversation.
Well,
Uh,
Gabby, it was such a pleasure.
it really is a pleasure. I think there's more, I think with a inside of a longer conversation, I think we really covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
I don't want to just like superimpose a question about women, just because I feel like in a way
Mm-hmm.
the question of like what women do in these paintings is like more is also much more woven into their surface
Mm-hmm.
than like a straightforward question about like the status of women or something like this. Like it's like the paintings are just driven by this idea of like a kind of feminine subject or protagonist that's actually organizing so much of the activity and also emotional narrative of the work. But I did want to just
Yeah.
name
There,
it.
I agree with you. It's definitely a very feminine exhibition. I wanted to create this sort of feminine, subversive character that led the storytelling. And there's also this quote by a prose by this photographer Martino Fernando, where he describes that the Indian Ocean is a woman, and that it's this like, you know, it's magnetic and mysterious. And he goes on to describe, all these wonderful verbs of what this, body of water, how it alludes to the feminine. And so throughout the exhibition are these moments of water. And it is this, I mean, even going back to mythology, the mermaid, you know. Um, so yeah, it's a very feminine led
Yeah,
show.
that's right. From the, it's like the water being like both in the, it's interesting, right? Because it's like the water is everywhere, but
Mm-hmm.
the figure that's the most inside of the water is in her bathtub. Like even the
Right, exactly.
it looks
And
like
then the
water might be an
moon.
actual path.
Yes, exactly. Totally, totally. Yeah, so there's all these like linkages. And that's when I know, like, people always ask me, like, how do you know when it's done?
Yeah,
But I'm like, when there's these connections where you're just like, okay, got it. Like that for me, I was like, okay, there's these linkages, and now I feel like I've woven a cloth.
that's right. That's right. It's like she, especially seeing, I know it's so funny that now we're talking about it since we're not looking at the images anymore, but
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
it's almost like they live in your mind after you see them, like looking at the paintings all together. It's like um I see the woman in her tub and I think about the shell, that like she's also the shell or like
Mm,
the animals who were the extraterrestrial, like the animals prepared
mm-hmm.
extraterrestrial assumption, right, is like
Yeah,
maybe they thought they were going to be raptured, but actually they're killed prostrate, and it's the antelope that's dying in front of the bath.
exactly.
Right?
And also like what I always find, and I think it comes through me, is like now more than ever in my practice, I'm really like in this moment where I'm like, I need to create these like human animal relationships. And I think they're like deeply profound. Like, so I'm always like, well, okay, in this painting, it's an antelope. And then in that painting, it's, uh, a seagull, or and now I'm working on a crocodile. I like this sort of the symbolism of creatures, and how it also reveals something about ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Which is also like the kind of repositioning of artists like Rousseau or something like this.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Completely.
Amazing, Cassie. Thank you so much for being so generous in your work and in conversation. This is really wonderful, and it's such a pleasure to get to talk with you.
Likewise, Gabby. Thank you for your questions.
Alrighty. Cassie, did you want to do the reading after the Q&A?
Sure,
Or
yeah.
okay. So now we're going to turn to our audience Q&A, and just as a reminder for folks in the crowd today, we have a link in the chat where you can submit your question. But we have a couple queued up here for you. We have two questions from Maya. Maya writes, "Dear Cassie, thank you for sharing today, especially about the in-between space and time of the nearing nighttime for your current show. It evokes a certain kind of familial spirituality that can perhaps be embodied into something as impactful as becoming a parent. I can imagine this chapter as a mother for you is transformative. How has it affected you in the way you create work and or find inspiration?"
Uh, Thank you, Maya. Maya, was it Maya?
Mhm.
For your questions. For me, painting now as a mother has only opened another portal where I feel like there's more attention and more sensitivity and awareness. So I think I've only become a better painter as well as a person.
Amazing. And the next question is, you said your landscapes are imagined or imaginary. How much of the figures are imaginary and how much do you depend on reference images?
So I work via piece by piece. So often it's like I'm just looking through art. So it's like I visit an exhibition, I go and see Bonnard at Foundation Mat, and then I'm like, that's a really amazing bather scene, and then um, I use that. I mean, I guess I just use life as reference, right? Like, and then I open a book and then I see an expired antelope. So I really work by just like interweaving, and that to me is like a really exciting way to work. But I need time for that, and I think actually this new place in my life where I have space has just become space and time has become more abundant. I can really carefully piece together narrative. So that has been wonderful. And then um, I'll pick palettes to sort of, you know, first I see one bit and then I'm like, okay, this is definitely a cool painting or it's a hot painting. And then I pick out the palette. So everything is just sort of like day by day in a way. And I really don't rush painting anymore. It's like I feel like maybe in my mid 20s and there was this, I was working acrylic and it was more immediate and I was just like, but now it's sort of like, okay, how do I have to work differently because I now have an extension of me, which is my daughter. So I just devote, if I can, 3 to 4 hours in the studio every day. And sometimes it's just staring at canvas, it's just staring at, paints or watching a Rafa paint or, so it's all really organic. But so I just use like if she picks a certain blue and I like that blue or I like that red, maybe I like that she chose blue and red and she made purple. And then I'm like, oh my God, purple. I have to use purple. I never use purple. And so now there's purple in my studio. So I definitely use references. I use life as reference.
Thank you so much for that response. Our next question, an audience member is wondering, what are you reading right now? And what are some important texts to you that we should all read?
Oh, that's a really funny question as a semi-new mother, because it's it's really hard to open a book. But I'm reading Jose Eduardo Agualusa, and I started the first few chapters. It's his first book, his latest book. why I'm slipping on the name right now. I don't know why, because I have the book in my bedroom. But he's an author I really love and admire. He is an Angolan author, and all his books are really good. And I also love Mia Couto. That's another writer I would recommend, and he's a Mozambican writer. So that's currently what I'm reading, is a book by Jose Eduardo Agualusa. And I actually, since I have a baby that usually takes my book away because she thinks it's hers, I just bought a Kindle. So I'm hoping that works out better.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
all that and letting us know what you're reading right now. Our next question comes from Asha in the audience. Asha writes, Cassie, I really love your work. I feel that animals and other than human figures are increasingly having more prominent subjectivity in your work. How has it been working with these subjects and what symbolism do they hold?
Well, I first started off with a painting called Visit from Ancestor, and then it was always just like Visit from Ancestor 2, then Visit from Ancestor 3, then is Visit from Ancestor 4. So it was like this um reconfiguration of this theme of like that the animal is an ancestor that comes to you with a message. And so when we finish our Q&A, the short prose I'll read is about this sort of idea of a message and someone arriving with the message, or something arriving with the message. So I like this ambiguity of like that everyone or anything can actually have a message for you if you're aware or sensitive enough to sit with it and be present with it. So, but now it feels like at this point of my life, I'm really like fleshing out these relationships, with um, between human and animal, and what this kind of imagining of landscape.
Thank you so
That's
much.
been the most interest in my painting as of now. I don't know what it'll be in a year's time, but yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer, Cassie. Our last question before we go to the reading today, is how do you think your early experiences working with photography or film and later in fashion impacted your eventual work painting in the studio?
Well, I always tell everyone, study the thing that you're not going to do, because I think that it just adds so much more to your practice. And I like this place of unknown, and learning. And I think that that intrigue and that mystery in life is just keeps the mundane more fresh. So I like a little bit of everything. I just, for me, painting has been the most beautiful way to tell story, and it feels really inherent.
Thank you so much for all those wonderful and amazing and thoughtful answers, Cassie. I'll pass it over back to you for the reading.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and thanks, Joshua, for leading the conversation. So I'm going to end today's Zoom with a short, at the beginning of John Ashbery North Farm, which is, I like that ambiguity is the central to the poem, which is something that we've been exploring in my work, and just different concepts. So I'll start. Somewhere, someone is traveling towards you at an incredible speed, traveling day and night through blizzards and desert heat. But will he know where to find you, recognize you when he sees you, give you the thing he has for you? And I chose this poem, or a piece of this poem, because I like that the journey is a metaphorical one. So I think that it could be literal and it could be metaphorical, and I like this in between space, and that the tension sits at the helm of the poem, and that the arrival is not guaranteed. And we don't know what the thing is. And I think that's really powerful, that the message is also a question. We don't know whether it's the thing is a message, a gift, or a meaning. So I thought that was a really beautiful way to sort of end our talk.
Thank you so, so much for sharing that with us. And thank you both, Cassie and Gabby, for that amazing conversation. Thank you, Kevin from 303 Gallery, for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're available tomorrow at 1 p.m., we'll be having a conversation with Stephanie D'Alessandro, Stephen C. Pinson, and Neil Baldwin on the event of Man Ray When Objects Dream at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Thank you so, so
Thank
much, Cassie and
you.
Thank you.
Gabby.
Thank
That
you,
was
Cassie.
amazing.
Thank you so,
It
so
was
much.
such a
Thank you,
lovely
Thank you, guys.
conversation. Bye, you
You've been
both.
Thank
Bye.
a
you.
Take care,
Cassie.
Cassie.
Go
Cheers.
see the show, everybody.